This is Part 3, Episode 129. There was only one other possibility besides these two empires. The person who had just come to investigate came from one of the Heavenly Soul Empire's reclusive sects. This was the only plausible explanation. Juzi felt a headache come on when she thought about reclusive sects. As of now, they had conquered more than two-thirds of the Heavenly Soul Empire's territory, but the Sun-Moon Empire had also sustained heavy losses. Their greatest losses weren't in the war, instead, their greatest losses occurred when they were fighting those reclusive sects. The Heavenly Soul Empire had a long history, which could be traced back 10,000 years. Back then, the Heavenly Soul Empire was still called the Heavendo Empire, and this empire was formed by the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Doling Empire. There were many soul masters in the Heavenly Soul Empire, and there were many reclusive sects as well. Even though these reclusive sects didn't want to have anything to do with the Heavenly Soul Empire in normal days, the Sun-Moon Empire was their enemy in the end. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they had to work together against their common enemy. Reclusive sects were always very secretive with what they did, as they focused on protecting themselves. They were always doing hit-and-runs against the Sun-Moon Empire, and that highly irritated her. Even though these people didn't have a decisive impact on the war, they were consistently causing damage to the Sun-Moon Empire. They had appeared in the Mingdo mountain range before, and now they had appeared far into the Heavenly Soul Empire's northeastern region. It seemed like this sect, who was adept with the art of concealment and reconnaissance, didn't just have one person who was good at these things. What was more frightening was the ice-type domain attack that had a reach of 1,000 meters in diameter. Based on this range, that person should be a powerful title Dolor. Title Dolor were always terrifying as an enemy. A title Dolor was just one person, and his powerful strength, in addition to the fact that he was hiding in the darkness, meant that he was a threat whenever and wherever. Even if this person didn't care about lashing out against normal soldiers, he was still a great threat to the Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. Without talking about other things, this person would destroy every single one of their aerial surveillance soul tools if he attacked a few more times. He could cause her entire army to go blind. Juzi's hands gradually clenched into fists. Cold light flickered in her eyes. She had to find a way to remove this threat, no matter what. Hui Yuhao had already returned to Dragon City at this point. The soul-stirring thrill from before was just another unimpressive experience among all his past experiences. He returned to the cloth store. Nan Qiuqiu was still awake, and was waiting in the courtyard for him. "Why did you take so long?" she asked with a frown. Hui Yuhao said, "The situation is more serious than I had imagined. The Sun-Moon Empire's Fire Phoenix Legion is hidden amidst the army of 20,000. Nan Qiuqiu was thrown into shock. How could she not know about the Fire Phoenix Legion? "What are they trying to do?" she said nervously. "Do they wish to destroy Dragon City?" If a legion with an overall fighting strength such as that one wanted to cause destruction, destroying an entire city really wasn't anything much. Hui Yuhao shook his head and said, "How can that be? If that were the case, then they wouldn't have to expend so much energy to penetrate Dragon City with soul tools and technology. However, I wasn't able to discover their goal." Nan Qiuqiu frowned and said, "Then what should we do?" "We should continue investigating and figure out what's happening. There must be something they want, with such a powerful Soul Engineer Legion around." Hui Yuhao stared at her with a strange look in his eyes. "Yes, investigating is the right way to go. But there's no we, there's only me." Nan Qiuqiu's eyebrows immediately went vertical. "What do you mean? You intend to abandon me and go alone?" Hui Yuhao said sincerely, "Qiuqiu, did you notice the disturbance outside just now?" Nan Qiuqiu was momentarily stunned, and said, "I didn't hear any disturbance, but I did see faint flickers outside the city." "That was you?" Hui Yuhao nodded as he recounted his experience in detail. "I managed to escape, but by a hair's breadth, with my own abilities. If you were with me, neither of us would have been able to escape." Hui Yuhao spoke with a very pained look on his face. Nan Qiuqiu was rude and unruly, but she definitely wasn't unreasonable. She stared at him and said, "You can't put it like that. Are you saying that I'm a burden?" Hui Yuhao said nothing, and he just stared quietly at her. Nan Chiu was a little embarrassed and annoyed at his stare. She grunted furiously and said, "Fine, so I am a burden. I won't follow you, then. But since they have already discovered you, their defenses will be much tighter. How are you going to find out what they want?" Hui Yuhao said, "I wanted to find intel directly, but since I can't do that, then I can only follow them. Since they have come all the way to the northern regions, their destination can't be far. I will definitely be able to find out what they want as long as I follow them. Don't worry, I will be more careful with the lesson I've just learned." Nan Chiu contemplated for a while. Even though she wasn't convinced, she had no choice but to admit that she was a lot weaker than Hui Yuhao was. Hui Yuhao would be burdened if he had to take another person with him. All right. You go, then. I'll wait in Dragon City for you and we'll head to our own destination from before after you come back. But you must be careful." Hui Yuhao laughed and said, Chiu is a reasonable lady, indeed. Don't do that. I'm going to sleep. Hurry and leave if you must. Nan Chiu turned around and went back to her own room after that. Hui Yuhao heaved a sigh in his mind as he watched her elegant profile. Chiu is a nice girl, and I can't let her become like Chiu back then, no matter what. His heart began to ache when he thought about Wang Chiu. Donga should still be alive no matter how her situation was, but Chiu was already. This had become an agony deep in his heart that would last forever. Hui Yuhao sighed as his thoughts stopped here, and returned to his own room. After this night's hustle, the Sun Moon Empire wouldn't move out throughout the night, so it wouldn't be too late for him to follow them in the morning. Hui Yuhao snuck out after finishing breakfast the next day. Nan Chiu didn't escort him out, but she sulked in her own room after he left instead. Am I not just a little weaker than you? I'll catch up to you. Nan Chiu decided that she would go into closed-door cultivation during the days that Hui Yuhao wasn't around, and she began to work hard inside the cloth store. Hui Yuhao left the city through the eastern gate just like he did the previous day. He returned to the forest that he was hiding in previously. He wasn't hasty to go out this time. Instead, he began to meditate in the middle of the forest as he observed the movements of the Sun Moon Empire's army in the distance. He wasn't stupid. He had dealt such a heavy blow to the Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion the previous day, so the defenses within their army camp had to be incredibly strict. He would be going to certain death if he took the risk to investigate at this time. Since that was the case, he chose to observe from afar, since his aim was to follow them anyway. The maximum range of his spiritual detection meant nothing could possibly go wrong if all he wanted to do was follow an army. Only if the Sun Moon Empire could redirect all their aerial surveillance soul tools to his location so that they could conduct surveillance closer to the ground across all positions could they possibly discover his presence. There wasn't much disturbance within the Sun Moon Empire's great army. Everything seemed very calm and peaceful one day after, as if nothing had happened last night. Hui Yuhao was very patient. He wasn't flustered at all as he just cultivated quietly inside the forest. He would just wait it out. His enemies weren't hasty, so why should he be? He simply used his spiritual power to detect in a single direction from time to time, and he would sweep over the Sun Moon Empire's camp to make sure that the Fire Phoenix Legion was still around before he continued cultivating. He had gained quite some inspiration from last night's battle. Furthermore, he had been focusing his energy on studying Ultimate Ice over recent weeks. That was something that needed a lot of time for him to slowly grasp. At the same time, he needed time to absorb the manifold mysterious ice essence in his body. Cultivating anywhere made no difference to him. As for the exposed outdoors, that was a piece of cake. 3 days passed like that in the blink of an eye. The Sun Moon Empire finally couldn't stand the loneliness anymore, as they set off to depart. Hui Yuhao had to admit that this army was very outstanding. They didn't create much of a disturbance as they moved out, and their formations were very neat and strict. The army on the periphery began to move first, and they took down their tents, while the soldiers responsible for Impedimenta took everything apart and packed it up. The soldiers formed up in neat lines as they proceeded towards the north. Hui Yuhao quickly saw the Fire Phoenix Legion's team. The Legion's members were also walking on the ground, and their formation was very neat. They didn't act all high and mighty just because they were soul engineers. They can't hold back any longer? A faint smile appeared at the corner of Hui Yuhao's mouth as he stood up. He wasn't worried at all. He couldn't follow too closely, as he would be easily discovered if he came too close. He just had to follow them from several kilometers out. With his imitation, those aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky couldn't possibly discover his presence as long as he maintained a sufficient distance. Hui Yuhao followed far behind once the army had completely uprooted and moved on. He didn't follow behind them for long, proceeded on their flank as he gradually shifted forward. He knew that for him to complete his reconnaissance mission, or even to ruin the Sun Moon Empire's mission, he had to allow his enemies to lower their guard first. Therefore, he couldn't allow his enemies to discover his presence, no matter what. His enemies would believe that he was already gone, given enough time, and that he had never returned after escaping the other day. As for making a move, he wouldn't do anything unless as a last resort. Hui Yuhao followed at a distance just like that. The Sun Moon Empire's army continued pushing forward as they went straight towards the north. The army was moving very quickly. They were almost always jogging. They would jog for an hour before they walked for a bit, and then jog again. This army was moving at a spectacular speed, and their overall quality was very obvious. The army went 100 kilometers north after one day. The air was starting to become increasingly cold. They stopped to set up camp and cook food. Hui Yuhao hid behind a small hill. The weather was cold, but that didn't affect him at all. However, he couldn't help but swallow some saliva as he stared at the smoke spiraling from the army camp in the distance. Drinking some hot soup in such snowy lands would be so luxurious. I'm just doing hard labor now. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly as his thoughts stopped there. However, he could only continue, since he was already at this stage. Hui Yuhao laid out his map as he leaned against the hill. He had prepared this map long ago. It wasn't a map of the Heavenly Soul Empire's northern region, instead, it was a detailed map of the Doluo continent's northern regions. He had spent quite a lot of money to get this map. The map itself was made from goatskin, and it was tough and soft at the same time. It could be preserved for a long time. Hui Yuhao scrutinized the map for a while when he discovered that the Sun Moon Empire's army was still going northeast. They would reach the border between the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Doling Empire if they went further in the same direction. They would also be bordering the extreme north there, and it would be even colder than it was here. The temperature there was no small problem for typical Soul Masters, but could normal soldiers really bear it? Hui Yuhao turned around as he contemplated, and he lay on his stomach on the hill as he gazed at the Sun Moon Empire's camp in the distance. He activated spiritual detection at the same time as he swept in toward the army camp. He quickly discovered that something else was happening. The Sun Moon Empire's camp seemed to be handing something out, and their soldiers were all lined up to collect those things. Everybody was to collect two items that resembled small boxes and cotton-padded clothes. The cotton-padded clothes seemed decent in quality. That was especially so for the cotton shoes. They were very thick and sturdy, and Hui Yuhao could tell that they would be very good at retaining warmth. It seems like the Sun Moon Empire have long been prepared. These soldiers are probably decent at resisting the cold, so the Sun Moon Empire can't have deployed soldiers from their own northern territories. Since that's the case, and in addition to the cotton clothes that they have prepared, they will actually be able to resist the severe cold for a short period of time. Hui Yuhao went through the night amidst the chilly winds. He understood during what those boxes that were given out to the soldiers did the next morning. Every box was about the size of a palm, and the soldiers placed them in their clothes. These boxes were very closely pressed against their inner shirts and tied around their waists. When they began to march, Hui Yuhao immediately realized that the boxes emanated gentle heat. The heat coursed throughout the soldiers' bodies and helped them resist the external cold. That works. Those tiny boxes should also be soul tools. If that was the case, the box definitely needed sealed milk bottles inside. Maintaining the heat didn't need too much soul power, but Hui Yuhao could tell from the size of the box that it could only be sustained for a few days before it had to be charged. Hui Yuhao thought carefully for a moment, and he couldn't help but concede his enemy's ingenuity. The Sun Moon Empire's army was following a formidable soul engineer legion, and the Fire Phoenix Legion had at least 300 soul engineers, while charging those small milk bottles didn't need too much of their soul power. When the army was resting at night, every soul master would be responsible for some soldiers' sealed milk bottles. Naturally, they would be able to charge all those milk bottles that way. Hui Yuhao hadn't expected the Sun Moon Empire to have developed soul tools for commoners to use. If, one day, they could find something to substitute for milk bottles, the Sun Moon Empire could truly conquer the entire continent, because that would be the time when normal soldiers could become soul engineers, and they would have a soul engineer's attacking power. Hui Yuhao thought about it. How frightening would it be if 100,000 soul engineers appeared on the battlefield? Hui Yuhao heaved a faint sigh inside. He shook his head as he accepted this reality in exasperation. It seemed like the Doluo continent's 3 native empires had to accomplish great feats as soon as possible if they wished to fight back against the Sun Moon Empire. Otherwise, within 100 years, even if the Sun Moon Empire didn't launch an invasion, their technological advantage would become increasingly evident. The Doluo continent would finally belong to them like a meal on a lunch plate. Hui Yuhao was lamenting inside, but he had to continue following them. He was still following far behind them on their flank, and he followed the army forward towards the Heavenly Soul Empire's northeastern region. The Sun Moon Empire's great army moved slower as the weather became colder. The place that Hui Yuhao had estimated they would reach within a day took them 2 days. Everything was white and snowy around him, and the cold winds howled through the air as they cut like blades. There wasn't much moisture in the air in a snowy place like this, because any bit of water would be immediately frozen. The temperature here was at least 30 degrees below zero, and normal people would find it extremely difficult to survive in such an environment. It was almost evening when the Sun Moon Empire set up camp once more. Their camp was a lot more compact compared to before. Furthermore, Hui Yuhao realized to his surprise that the layout was also different. The Fire Phoenix Legion, who were originally in the innermost sections, were shifted to the periphery. They formed an arch as they directly faced the northwestern winds, as if they were alpha wolves guarding their companions from the most bitter chill. The commander's tent was apparently right at the front, and it didn't move at all even when the cold wind blew against it. The other tents were tightly and neatly arranged in rows behind them. This was the layout that could preserve as much heat as possible. The spiraling smoke had disappeared by now, and he could see hot air rising from some large tents. There was no doubt that the army cooks were located toward the center, and not on the outside. Otherwise, starting a fire would be very difficult in a place like this, where water turned into ice. Hui Yuhao heaved another faint sigh in his heart. I have been freezing for a day, and I should also get a sip of that hot soup. Even though I'm not afraid of the cold, I have been exposed to the weather in this snowy place for days. These days haven't really been comfortable at all. However, Hui Yuhao could tell that the Sun Moon Empire's army wasn't that far away from their destination. That was because they were always traveling toward the northwest, and now, they were near the extreme north's borders. They would enter the extreme north if they continued forward. Hui Yuhao had been in the extreme north before, and was thus very clear on the dreadful conditions there. Normal people would definitely not survive in a place like that, and that was the case even with cotton-padded clothes and soul tools that provided heat. Even soul masters couldn't go deep inside if they didn't have a certain standard. Furthermore, there were many ice-type soul beasts that lived in the extreme north. They borrowed strength from their surroundings, and they were much more powerful than typical soul beasts. The Fire Phoenix Legion would run out of strength no matter how powerful they were if they ran into a pack of formidable soul beasts. Hui Yuhao could faintly guess that the reason why the Fire Phoenix Legion was involved in this operation was likely to be because their abilities had something to do with fire. Fire-type abilities would be greatly limited in a place like this, but fire-type abilities were also good at resisting the cold. The more he thought this way, the more Hui Yuhao felt that the Fire Phoenix Legion wasn't directing the Sun Moon Empire's army here to battle. They were here for something else. Hui Yuhao continued to think as faint light flickered. He hid himself within a small depression in a mountain. He didn't have any fire-type abilities, and having something warm in such a snowy place was completely impossible. However, he had his own methods. He retrieved some dry rations from his storage-type soul tool before he placed them on his right hand. A strange scene occurred. The tough dry rations in his hand gradually became soft, before they began to emanate a faint warmth. Hui Yuhao hadn't wasted his time in the extreme north over the past few days. His understanding of the element of ice had become increasingly deep, especially in terms of controlling heat. Ice needed a lot of heat to melt. In the same way, water-forming ice would release large amounts of heat. Hui Yuhao leveraged this principle as he sealed off the air around him before he began to control his blood and condense it into ice. This naturally released heat. Such control shouldn't be too difficult for a person with spiritual power as powerful as his. However, the dry rations would only be a little warm and soft. He had to eat them quickly. In the end, he couldn't let the blood in his hands freeze for too long as he could swallow those dry rations. Hui Yuhao swiftly dealt with dinner as he prepared to meditate once more. However, right at this moment, he suddenly realized to his surprise that something was happening in the Sun Moon Empire's army. The Sun Moon Empire began to erect thick metal pillars around their camp in the dark of night. Some of the Fire Phoenix Legion's members clad in dark red armor were hard at work, and they were flying through the air as they arranged those metal pillars according to their designated locations, before certain individuals would hammer them into the ground and stabilize them. Normal people would need many large machines to complete a task like this. However, this wasn't much for soul engineers. Soul engineers were soul masters first, and they could rely on auxiliary soul tools for aid, so they found such tasks very easy and casual. It didn't take long before they were almost done with their job. Have they arrived at their destination? Hui Yuhao observed closely. There was no doubt that these metal pillars were brought with their storage-type soul tools. Every pillar seemed about 50 meters long, and had diameters of more than 3 meters. It wasn't hard to imagine their weight. They were not only brought by storage-type soul tools, this had to be done with high-quality storage-type soul tools. What is the Sun Moon Empire doing here? Is this where they intended to be? What can there be in the barren extreme north? Hui Yuhao had many doubts in his mind. However, he could only continue observing. At least, he was sure of one thing, that the Sun Moon Empire wouldn't create a fortress here like idiots. The enormous metal pillars weighed at least 5,000 kilos, and several high-tier soul engineers had to work together to arrange and install them properly in the ground. 7 or 8 pillars were quickly drilled into the ground, and every pillar was at least 30 meters deep, while 12 meters remained above ground. After this, Hui Yuhao saw that the Sun Moon Empire had used these metal pillars as a foundation to build machines around them. It was Hui Yuhao's first time seeing such machines. He had no idea what they were. Their structure appeared very complicated, and soul power undulations rippled from them. These machines were very sophisticated. Although Hui Yuhao could use his spiritual power to imprint their structure in his mind, he had to get closer first. Right now, he was around 5 kilometers from the Sun Moon Empire's military. He would only be discovered if he went too close. This was why he wasn't anxious at all. No, I'll go take a look at night. Hui Yuhao believed that he could find out what these soul tools were used for if he could observe their core formations, given his understanding of soul tools. The Sun Moon Empire wouldn't do this for nothing. They had to have their reasoning behind building such a formation here. Furthermore, he was a little relaxed knowing that the Sun Moon Empire had not built them as a means of war. The Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion didn't seem to have the intention of constructing a soul formation here. Without a sufficiently large soul formation, Hui Yuhao believed that this place wasn't enough to threaten him yet. Night fell. The Sun Moon Empire's soul engineers returned to their tents after working for more than 2 hours. When night fell, the temperature of the extreme north would fall significantly. No soul engineer would be able to work under such rigorous conditions. The sky had turned fully dark. Amidst the chilly wind, the snow on the ground was blown into the air, turning into huge patches of ice flakes. Not only was the temperature of these ice flakes extremely low, but they also combined with the chilly wind to make it bitingly cold. If a normal person's skin was exposed, it would dry up and sustain frostbite in a matter of seconds. Hui Yuhao waited another 2 hours until the entire military base had quieted down and all the soul lamps had been switched off before he silently snuck out. Around a week had passed since the start of this expedition. Hu Hao believed that the Sun Moon Empire's military should have lowered their guard slightly, even though they were very cautious. Those machines were on the perimeter of the base. No matter what, there shouldn't be too much danger. Hu Hao inched forward amidst the darkness. He unleashed his imitation and rapidly came closer to the military base. 5 kilometers was a very short distance for him. In just a short while, he managed to get close to the military base. He unleashed his spiritual detection and first scanned the sky. He didn't want to repeat his earlier mistake. If the aerial surveillance soul tools were at an altitude of 500 meters or below, he would rather give up on this surveillance mission. There were indeed aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky. However, they were much higher up. They weren't carrying out any oscillation detections towards the ground. At the same time, Hu Hao also carefully used his spiritual detection to scan the surroundings of those machines. There weren't any oscillation detectors or spiritual barriers around those machines either. After ensuring his safety, he continued to get closer, and quickly came near those large-scale machines and observed them. The massive metal pillars gave off a stronger sense of oppression the closer he came to them. He touched them gently before using his spiritual power to sense them. Hu Hao discovered that these metal pillars were constructed using alloys. Although they were large, they were still mixed with many other rare metals inside. This also meant that the cost of even one metal pillar would be astronomical. The pillars were very strong. It seemed that they were being used to support some other soul tools. Many of the soul tools that were manufactured with these metal pillars as their foundation didn't have core formations yet. They looked very exquisite, but it was unclear what they were going to be used for. After furrowing his brow, Hu Hao started to become a little confused. What is the Sun Moon Empire trying to do? It seemed like he had to continue waiting. It was only through greater observation that he could discover their true motive. Hu Hao didn't dare to stay any longer as he thought until here. He turned around and was prepared to retreat. At this moment, a cold voice sounded. Since you're already here, you don't have to rush to leave. Hu Hao was petrified. At that instant, the surrounding several hundred square meters started to shine brightly with light. All the lights were focused on him and the metal pillars were completely exposed under the lights. Although Hu Hao was protected by his imitation, he could clearly sense that he was being locked on. How is this possible? Hu Hao was astonished at this instant. He had believed that he was very cautious. How could he possibly have been discovered? He hadn't discovered any oscillation detectors or spiritual barriers earlier. Weird, isn't it? You don't have to be surprised. Since you're able to perform surveillance on us, we had to put in a lot of effort to set this trap for you. The edges of the extreme north are famed for their extremely low temperatures. Amidst the low temperatures, thermal detectors are especially sensitive. Even though you've tried your best to assimilate your body temperature with your surroundings, you forgot that there will be changes in the air currents as you move about. This more or less changes the temperature of the air. No matter whether it's you or the air, the outcome is the same. Of course, such slight changes are unable to explain anything. Generally, we wouldn't be too bothered even if we discovered this. However, it's different today. When I instructed people to build this foundation, I expected you to come. This was why I gathered many thermal detectors far away, and these thermal detectors are specifically targeted at this small region. Even a slight thermal change can be detected. Furthermore, those controlling the thermal detectors are ordinary soldiers under me. They don't know what the point of it is. This is why they won't develop any caution against you. I'm clearly aware that titled Dolual like you are very sensitive to danger. However, these people I sent out won't pose any threat to you. How can you sense any danger if that's the case? Even the people surrounding you right now were informed that this was only an exercise. I'm afraid you have nowhere to run now. Hu Hao couldn't help but sigh as he heard the lady speak until here. It seemed like he had been too careless. Or rather, this person was simply too cunning. To trap him, she had been waiting for an opportunity to set up this trap. Wasn't she afraid that he hadn't followed them here? Or rather, she was setting up this trap based on the thinking that he would be here. She was patient, even more patient than him. She was indeed a very strong opponent. Hui Yuhao didn't utter a sound or move. He could only feel his skin numbing, and couldn't move at all. Once he moved, countless hidden soul tools would be fired towards him instantly. Since the enemy had prepared such a trap, they would definitely reckon that their attack was sufficient to harm him. Furthermore, he could also hear from the words of the enemy that it was a trap set for a title dolor. Hui Yuhao wasn't feeling depressed. He was reprimanding himself instead. In the academy, he was the only one who had completed the ultimate soldier plan, but he was actually in such a situation right now. He could only blame his carelessness. It was a problem birthed from his overconfidence. Of course, the cunning of his enemy was key to him being trapped. However, he could only pick problems with himself at this moment. At the same time, he started to think of ways he could escape. You should feel that you've been locked on by us. I'm not afraid of telling you that you have been completely locked on by our linked defensive soul tools. It's impossible for you to escape. At the same time, there are more than 100 offensive soul tools aimed at you. They are all at least Class 5 soul tools. Among them, one is even a Class 9 soul tool. There are 16 Class 8 soul tools. If you think you can escape, you can try. That cold voice sounded gentler. For some reason, Hui Yuhao seemed to feel that he knew this voice as it became gentler. Do I know this person? However, this thought disappeared as soon as it appeared. The pressing issue was how he was going to escape. The enemy had said everything she said to out psychological pressure in him. However, by saying all that, it was clear that she wanted to capture him alive. Although Hui Yuhao was trapped, he had great spiritual power, and was very calm. He was able to maintain his cool even in such a situation, and made a correct judgment. The other party doesn't want to kill me. She wants to capture me alive. This is my opportunity. If their aim was to kill him, he would have felt it earlier. He didn't have the senses of a title dolor, but he possessed the eye of destiny. Once he faced mortal danger, he would have some sort of sensation. His enemy was too cunning. She got almost everything right, but she didn't have any intention of killing him. It seems like it's my imitation and star anise on the thrust that attracted her attention. Given her absolute advantage, her intention must be to capture me and get information out of me. If that's the case, I stand a chance. Hui Yuhao didn't move. He unleashed his spiritual power and turned it into a huge invisible web that started to spread out in the direction of that voice. Very soon, he discovered that he knew nothing about this trap. The soul engineers that were in ambush weren't on the ground at all. They were beneath the ground. They weren't far away and dug their way out before aiming their soul tools at him. At this instant, Hui Yuhao understood everything. When the enemy was installing the metal pillars earlier, they looked like they were trying to draw his attention. In fact, they were thinking of ways to dig tunnels below and hide their soul engineers. Without a doubt, these soul engineers had some ways of hiding their own auras. At the same time, they didn't receive any instructions to carry out an ambush. This was why Hui Yuhao didn't discover them. Cunning, this marshal is indeed too cunning. She actually set such a big trap to catch me. Hui Yuhao intentionally deepened his voice, made it nasally, and said, "What's the point of saying all that? If you want to kill me, do it." The lady with the cold voice laughed. "I just want to avoid unnecessary death. As long as you're willing to lay down your arms and surrender, I can guarantee your safety. Otherwise, we'll just lose some machines." Hui Yuhao was silent for a moment before saying, "How do I know you're telling the truth? What if you kill me after I surrender? What happens then?" That lady chortled coldly, "Do you have the right to negotiate with us now? If you believe me, you might survive. If you don't, you'll die. A clever person knows what to choose." Hui Yuhao definitely knew that there weren't any guarantees, given such a cunning opponent. However, he needed some time to analyze the situation. This was because this lady was clearly using a displacement soul tool. Her voice didn't come from where she actually was. He needed more time to determine her position. Let me consider it for a moment. Hui Yuhao replied. You can do so, but shouldn't you reveal your true self, so that I can see who the person who brought so much damage to my Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion is? Yes. Hui Yuhao answered without any hesitation. At the same time, he removed his imitation. It was just that he used it to slightly change his appearance just as he removed it. He now looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. As for his figure, he didn't change it. It was easy to be exposed if he changed his appearance too much. As Hui Yuhao slowly appeared, more and more equipment locked onto him. The other party seemed to be observing him. After a brief moment, that lady's voice sounded very skeptical. You used a soul skill to conceal yourself? Not a soul tool. Her voice sounded disappointed. Hui Yuhao nodded and replied, You're right, of course it's through a soul skill. I have never heard of a soul tool being capable of concealing someone. That lady said after a momentary silence, All right, whether it's soul skills or soul tools, you only have one chance to survive, that is to submit to the Sun Moon Empire and become one of us. Life is precious. Everyone can only live once. You've been cultivating since the beginning, and have put in a lot of hard work. I don't suppose you want to die just like that. If you listen to us from now on, I can give you a new life. This world is going to be ruled by the Sun Moon Empire soon.